An arrogant neighbor cut my internet cables, not knowing I own the company. When the truth came out during the apartment building meeting, tears of humiliation streamed down her face. A secret kept for years was revealed in the most unexpected way, forever transforming the relationships in that community. A story of justice, patience, and perfect revenge that will warm your heart. Subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Have you ever stopped to think how life has a funny way of putting unbearable people in our path just to test the limits of our patience? Well, I thought that after 40 years of working with difficult people, I'd be entitled to a peaceful retirement in the apartment building I chose to live my golden years. Sadly mistaken. The universe had other plans, and one of them answered to the name of Mrs. Margaret from apartment 47. You know, that type of person who seems born just to make others' lives a living hell? Who complains about the sound of rain falling, the smell of flowers in the garden, and even the color of the sky when it's too blue. That's Margaret. 68 years old, hair always impeccably dyed, an artificial shade of blonde, long blood-red nails, and a supernatural ability to find problems where they don't exist. For 5 consecutive years, she reigned supreme as the condominium manager of Spring Residence. 5 long and torturous years where her words were practically law. The begonias in the garden are too red. They need to be replaced. The doorman smiles too much. That's unprofessional. The elevator is too noisy when it reaches the 3rd floor. And so on, in an endless list of complaints that made even the most patient consider moving to another apartment building. Me? I've always been the discreet type. 58 years old. A widower for 3 years, a recently retired university professor. My neighbors barely knew my name, and that suited me just fine. I liked my quiet routine, waking up early, reading, the newspaper on the balcony, taking care of my plants, and at night watching a series or movie. Nothing extraordinary, just the simple life I always wanted for my retirement. What no one knew and didn't need to know was that in the last few years before I retired, I invested a considerable part of my savings in a local internet company. From administration professor to majority shareholder of ConnectNet, the only internet provider in the region. Ironic, isn't it? A man nearing 60 who barely understood the difference between Wi-Fi and Bluetooth was now the owner of a telecommunications company. It was a silent investment. Not even my children knew. I preferred to keep it that way. At my age, the less people know about your money, the better. And it worked perfectly, until that fateful Sunday morning. It was a perfect spring day. Blue sky, pleasant temperature, birds singing. I had prepared my favorite breakfast, homemade bread with blackberry jam my daughter had made, a strong coffee, and a generous slice of cheese. Everything ready to watch the World War II documentary I'd been waiting for all week. I turned on the TV, settled into my favorite armchair, and nothing. The message on the screen read, "No internet connection." I confess my first thought was, great. Just today, Mary Helen is going to video call me from her granddaughter's house. Mary Helen, a longtime friend of mine, was visiting family in Portugal, and we had planned a call for her to show me the places she was visiting. No internet, no call. I did what anyone would do. I restarted the router, nothing. I turned everything off, waited a few minutes, and turned it back on. Still nothing. I checked the cables behind the TV, all connected. That's when I noticed the modem blinking strangely, as if sending an SOS in Morse code. With a sigh of resignation, I decided to check the external box where the main connections were. I went down the 3 flights of stairs, the elevator was under maintenance obviously, and went to the side of the building where the meters and connections were. And that's when I got the first surprise of the day. The box door was ajar. Someone had been there recently. I opened the door completely and almost fell backward at what I saw. The cables that fed my apartment, and only my apartment, mind you, were cut. Not accidentally damaged, not worn out by time, cut. A clean, precise, almost surgical cut. That was deliberate. My blood boiled in my veins. Who would do such a thing, and why? Me, who never bothered anyone, who barely made noise walking around the apartment, who always greeted everyone with a polite smile, even when it wasn't returned. Who would have a motive for this kind of sabotage? The answer came quicker than I expected, in the form of a poisonous comment from behind me. "Problems with the internet, Professor Robert." That voice. that falsely concerned tone that hid malicious satisfaction. I turned slowly, and there she was, Mrs. Margaret in her pink silk robe, matching slippers, and that smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Seems so," I replied, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Someone cut the cables to my connection." "How?" "Terrible," she said, bringing her hand to her chest in a theatrical gesture. "It must have been some vandal, or perhaps an animal. Squirrels can be very destructive, you know. They love gnawing on wires." "Squirrels." "Right, squirrels with gardening shears, because the cut on the cables was so precise that not even the best surgeon in the world could replicate it." I swallowed the sharp reply that threatened to escape my mouth. "It wasn't worth it, not yet." "That must be it," I agreed, closing the box. "I'll call the company and request a repair." "Good luck with that," she laughed, that kind of laugh that makes your stomach turn. "I heard they're taking weeks to handle." "Service calls." That's when I noticed something in her hand. Partially hidden by the folds of her robe was a pair of gardening shears, small, but with blades sharp enough to cut internet cables. I kept my expression neutral, despite the volcano of rage threatening to erupt inside me. "Taking care of the garden so early, Mrs. Margaret?" She seemed momentarily flustered, hiding the shears more tightly. "The roses need constant attention, Professor. You should know that, seeing as your begonias are dying from lack of proper care." My begonias were perfectly healthy, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was almost certain who had cut my cables, and I was also beginning to understand why. At the last apartment building meeting, I had been the only one to vote against the abusive increase in the monthly fee that Mrs. Margaret wanted to implement. A 30% increase for aesthetic improvements that no one had asked for or needed. I didn't just vote against it. I presented solid arguments for why it was unnecessary and financially irresponsible. For the first time in 5 years, a proposal of hers was rejected. Apparently, revenge came in the form of gardening shears. "Well, I'll get this sorted," I said, turning my back and walking towards my apartment. "Have a good Sunday, Mrs. Margaret." "You, too, Professor. I hope you can resolve your little problem." The smile in her voice was almost palpable. If only she knew who she was messing with. But she didn't. No one did. And perhaps it was time to use that to my advantage. Back in my apartment, I picked up the phone and called my own company. I put it on speakerphone, deliberately increasing the volume. My kitchen window overlooked the garden, where, coincidentally, Mrs. Margaret was now pruning her precious roses. "ConnectNet, good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon. My name is Robert Smith, a resident of Spring Residence, apartment 302. My internet is out. It seems the cables were cut." "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Smith. Let me check when we can send a technician." I could see out of the corner of my eye that Mrs. Margaret had stopped pruning and was leaning towards my window, pretending to examine a particularly troublesome rose. "You're in luck," the attendant continued. "We have an opening for 3 weeks from now." 3 weeks? I exclaimed, feigning indignation. "That's impossible. I need internet for work to communicate with my family." "I'm sorry, sir. We're swamped with service calls. There's a competing company running an aggressive promotion in the area, and several clients have had similar problems recently. Cut cables, damaged connection, cheap. Interesting. Very interesting. So it wasn't just me." "I see. And there's nothing you can do to expedite it?" "Unfortunately not, sir. Our technicians are overloaded." "All right," I sighed dramatically. "I'll wait then." I hung up the phone and casually observed through the window. Mrs. Margaret was smiling at her roses, as if they had told the funniest joke in the world. Little did she know I had just found a much bigger clue than I expected. A competing company with an aggressive promotion and clients with mysteriously cut cables. This wasn't just personal revenge. It was commercial sabotage. That same afternoon, I made a few discreet calls. First to John, the operational manager at ConnectNet. "John, it's Robert. Have we been having many cases of cut cables recently?" "Mr. Robert, good to hear your voice. Yes, it's a problem that started about 2 months ago, especially in the upscale fair apartment buildings. Spring Residence, Lake Gardens, Green Villas, all in the same region. And which competitor is running an aggressive promotion in that area?" "Fiberlink." They started a campaign 3 months ago offering 6 months at half price for those who switch providers. FiberLink, a company that recently appeared on the market, using wireless technology, eliminating the need for cables. Convenient for a situation where cables were being mysteriously cut. John, can you send me a complete report of these incidents and also any information you have on FiberLink? Of course, Mr. Robert. I'll send it by the end of the day. My mind was already racing. Something bigger was happening here, and somehow my dear neighbor was involved. Now it was a matter of finding out how and why. John's report arrived a few hours later and confirmed my suspicions. In the last 2 months, there had been 27 cases of cut cables in luxury apartment buildings in the region. In all cases, clients reported delays in technical service, and frustrated, many ended up migrating to FiberLink. The coincidence was too great to ignore. But a crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. How did Mrs. Margaret fit into all this? The answer came the next morning when I was flipping through the local newspaper at the cafe near the apartment building. In the classified section, a small but eye-catching ad, FiberLink hiring sales representatives for expansion in the region. Attractive commissions. Contact Margaret Brown. Margaret Brown. Margaret Brown. Mrs. Margaret. The same person who, coincidentally, had gardening shears near the distribution box when my cables were cut. Everything was starting to make sense now. She wasn't just an unbearable manager with a thirst for power. She was a FiberLink sales representative who was deliberately sabotaging ConnectNet's clients to force them to switch providers. My first reaction was disbelief. How could someone go to such lengths? It was illegal, unethical, and completely absurd. My second reaction was anger, an almost uncontrollable urge to confront her immediately, expose her actions to the entire apartment building, report her to the authorities. But then I took a deep breath. There was an opportunity here, a chance to resolve this in a much more satisfying way. If there's one thing I've learned in almost 6 decades of life, it's that patience is a powerful weapon. Revenge is a dish best served cold, as they say, and I was willing to serve mine cold. During the following week, I pretended to be desperate without internet. I complained openly in the common areas of the apartment building, mentioned how difficult it was to communicate with my children, how I was missing my favorite shows, a real performance worthy of an Oscar, and it worked. On Wednesday, while I was casually watering my dying begonias in the garden, Mrs. Margaret appeared. Still no internet, Professor. Unfortunately, I sighed dramatically. ConnectNet said they can only send someone next week. I'm almost ready to cancel the service. Her eyes gleamed like a predator's who had just spotted easy prey. You know, Professor, I think I can help you. I know an excellent company that uses wireless technology, no cables that can be damaged. Really? I feigned interest. That would be wonderful. Yes, FiberLink. They have a special promotion right now, 6 months at half price. And the best part, she lowered her voice as if sharing a valuable secret. Between us, I can get you an even bigger discount. I have some contacts at the company. Contacts? Let's say I know people who can expedite your process. No waiting lists, no bureaucracy. What do you think? What did I think? I thought I was about to catch a shark using itself as bait. Sounds great, Mrs. Margaret, really great. Could you give me more information? Of course, how about coffee tomorrow? I can bring all the promotional material, contracts, everything you need to make the switch. Perfect. Noon at my apartment. I'll be there, she smiled, that smile that didn't reach the eyes. Little did she know I was also smiling inside, and my smile was genuine. The next morning, I carefully prepared everything. I set up a discreet camera in the living room, completely legal, as it was in my own apartment. I printed some ConnectNet documents that would be accidentally seen during our conversation. And most importantly, I called John with specific instructions. Exactly at noon, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Margaret was impeccably dressed in a navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of apartment building fees. In her hands, an elegant leather briefcase and a business smile. Come in, Mrs. Margaret. Would you like some coffee? That would be lovely, thank you. While I prepared coffee in the kitchen, she settled on the living room couch, looking around with poorly disguised curiosity. Her eyes landed exactly where I wanted. on the side table with the ConnectNet documents partially visible. "You have a charming apartment," she commented when I returned with 2 cups of coffee. "So, cozy." The condescending tone was almost comical. My apartment was 3 times larger than hers, decorated with pieces I brought back from my world travels and original artwork. But to Mrs. Margaret, if it wasn't ostentatious, it was cozy. "Thank you. Now, about this internet." "Oh, yes." She opened her briefcase, taking out colorful brochures and a contract already, partially filled out. "Fiberlink is simply revolutionary. State-of-the-art technology, no need for physical cables that can be damaged by bad weather. Or gardening shears," I thought to myself. "And the speed is guaranteed?" I asked, feigning interest as I flipped through the material. "Absolutely. Much superior to ConnectNet, which uses outdated technology. Besides," she lowered her voice again, "between us, ConnectNet is having serious financial problems. There are rumors that they are about to close." This was news to me, the owner of the company. I had to restrain myself from laughing. "Really? What a shame. They've always provided good service." "Good service? With a 3-week wait for a technician? Professor, you deserve better." That's when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Margaret seemed annoyed by the interruption. "Are you expecting someone?" "Not that I recall," I replied, getting up to answer. I opened the door and there was John, exactly as planned, dressed in his ConnectNet uniform and carrying a toolbox. "Mr. Smith, I'm from ConnectNet. We're here to fix your connection." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Mrs. Margaret's expression was priceless, a mix of shock, anger, and panic. "But how?" "The central office said you wouldn't come until next week," I commented, winking discreetly at John. "There was a cancellation and we took the opportunity to move up your appointment. You're a priority customer after all." "Priority customer?" Mrs. Margaret couldn't hide the confusion in her voice. "Yes, madam," John replied, entering the apartment. "Mr. Smith is one of our most important clients." "Because of my punctuality in payments, I presume," I commented casually. John smiled. "That too, but mainly because you are a long-time customer," I interrupted quickly. It wasn't time to reveal my trump card yet. "John, this is Mrs. Margaret, the apartment building manager, and apparently a Fiberlink sales representative." Her discomfort was palpable. I just help some neighbors find better solutions for their problems." "How generous of you," I commented, maintaining a friendly tone while watching John head to the balcony where the apartment's main connection was located. "Well, since your problem is being resolved, I don't think we need to continue this conversation," he said, hastily gathering the Fiberlink promotional materials. "On the contrary," I insisted gently, "I'm still very interested in hearing about Fiberlink, especially about how they managed to offer such quick installation for clients whose ConnectNet cables were mysteriously cut." The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" I picked up my tablet and showed her a video. The apartment building's security camera, strategically positioned near the distribution box, clearly showed Mrs. Margaret cutting the cables with her gardening shears. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." She turned even paler. "If that was possible." That's an invasion of privacy. So you can't..." "It's a security camera in a common area of the apartment building, Mrs. Margaret. The same camera you insisted so much on installing at the last residents' meeting. Remember? To ensure everyone's safety." John returned from the balcony. "It's all set, Mr. Smith. I fixed the connection and checked that there are no other damages." "Thank you, John." I turned to Mrs. Margaret. "Looks like I won't need Fiberlink services after all." This is ridiculous. You have no proof of anything. It was an accident. I was just checking the cables." "With gardening shears?" John asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'll sue you for defamation," she exclaimed, getting up abruptly. "This won't stand." "I don't think you are not in a position to threaten anyone, Mrs. Margaret," I said calmly. "I have evidence that you deliberately damaged ConnectNet property, not only in my case, but in several other apartment buildings in the region. That's a crime, you know? Not to mention the ethical issue of being the apartment building manager and simultaneously a sales representative for a company that directly benefits from the residents' problems." She was silent for a moment, calculating her options. Finally, she forced a tense smile. "All right, let's talk like adults. What do you want? Money? Forfeit the manager position?" Actually, I want you to attend the next apartment building meeting. I have something important to communicate to all the residents. She frowned, suspicious. What kind of communication? You'll have to wait to find out, just like everyone else. Until then, I suggest you immediately stop sabotaging ConnectNet's cables, unless you want this video to reach the police, of course. Her expression wavered between anger and fear. Finally, she picked up her briefcase and headed for the door. This isn't over, she muttered before leaving. Actually, Mrs. Margaret, it's just beginning, I replied calmly before closing the door behind her. John let out a contained laugh as soon as she left. Congratulations, Mr. Robert. I've never seen anyone corner a predator like that. But are you sure it's wise to wait until the apartment building meeting? She could cause more trouble by then. I'm sure, I replied, smiling. Some lessons need to be public to be truly learned. Besides, I've already taken steps to protect our cables throughout the region. Additional cameras, reinforced surveillance. She won't be able to do any more damage. And so it was. During the 2 weeks leading up to the apartment building meeting, Mrs. Margaret avoided me as if I had a contagious disease. The other residents noticed the change. The woman who normally made a point of meddling in everyone's lives now barely left her apartment. When she did, she seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. Rumors began to circulate. What could have happened to the intransigent manager? Was she sick? Did she have family problems? No one knew for sure, but everyone noticed that, for the first time in 5 years, complaints about noise, decoration, and the use of common areas had stopped completely. Finally, the day of the monthly apartment building meeting arrived. Normally, about half of the residents attended, the minimum required for a quorum. But that night, the party room was packed. The rumors about the manager's strange behavior had piqued everyone's curiosity. Mrs. Margaret arrived punctually at 8 p.m., dressed in a vibrant red pantsuit, her armor for apartment building battles. But her eyes betrayed her nervousness when she saw me sitting in the first row, calm and smiling. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice slightly trembling. Let's start our monthly meeting. First item on the agenda, approval of the previous minutes. The meeting proceeded normally for about half an hour. Approval of accounts, discussion about necessary repairs, voting for the new color of the building's facade. I remained silent, patiently awaiting the right moment. Finally, we reached the last item. General matters. Does anyone have anything to add? Mrs. Margaret asked, clearly anxious to end the meeting as quickly as possible. I raised my hand. I do. The hall fell silent. It wasn't common for me to speak up at meetings. Certainly, Professor Robert, she said, forcing a smile. That didn't reach her eyes. I calmly stood up and walked to the front of the room. Good evening, everyone. As you know, I'm a discreet man. I rarely speak up in these meetings because I believe that most of the time, things work well when we let competent people do their job. Some murmurs of agreement. However, there are situations where silence becomes complicity, situations where not speaking up is allowing wrong things to continue happening. I looked directly at Mrs. Margaret, who looked like she was about to faint. In recent months, several residents of this and other apartment buildings in the region have experienced problems with their internet connections. Cables mysteriously cut, delayed service, and forced migration to a new company, FiberLink. The murmurs grew louder. Several residents nodded, recognizing the situation I was describing. I recently discovered that these incidents were not accidental. They were deliberately caused by someone who would directly benefit from ConnectNet's problems. Mrs. Margaret abruptly stood up. That's absurd. We don't have time for conspiracy theories, Professor. We have important matters to discuss. Actually, I continued calmly, I have proof. I signaled to John, who was discreetly at the back of the room. He turned on the projector, and on the white wall of the hall, the security camera video appeared. Mrs. Margaret, in her pink robe, methodically cutting the cables in the distribution box. The hall erupted in exclamations of shock and indignation. That's a fake, she shouted, but her voice trembled. Someone is trying to discredit me. I have 26 more similar videos from different apartment buildings, I replied calmly, all showing the same person. You, Mrs. Margaret, a FiberLink sales representative, deliberately sabotaging the competition for your own benefit. She looked around, realizing she had lost the assembly's support. Her eyes, previously full of defiance, now showed panic. "You don't understand," she tried to defend herself. "ConnectNet is a terrible company. The service is awful. The technology is outdated." "That is something I strongly disagree with," I interrupted, my voice now firmer. "As the owner and main shareholder of ConnectNet, I can guarantee that our technology is state-of-the-art and our service would be exemplary if we weren't constantly dealing with sabotage." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to me, then to Mrs. Margaret, and back to me. What?" she finally managed to stammer. "I am the owner of ConnectNet," I repeated calmly. "The company you've been systematically sabotaging to benefit Fiberlink and receive hefty commissions." Her face went from red to white in seconds. Her legs seemed about to give way. "That doesn't... Why did you never say anything?" "I have no obligation to disclose my private investments, Mrs. Margaret. Unlike you, who as manager has a legal obligation to disclose conflicts of interest, like being a sales representative for a company that directly benefits from the residents' problems." The residents started speaking up, demanding the manager's immediate resignation. Some asked that she be prosecuted. Others wanted reimbursement for the inconvenience caused. Mrs. Margaret seemed a shadow of the authoritarian woman we knew. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her perfect makeup. I didn't mean to..." "Spare us," interrupted Antonia, an 80-year-old woman who rarely spoke up at meetings. "You deliberately harmed your neighbors for money. How can you look at us now?" At that moment, I felt a mix of satisfaction and pity. Satisfaction that justice was being served. Pity at seeing someone so completely destroyed by her own greed. "I propose an immediate vote for the manager's removal," suggested Mr. Frederick from 508, "and that she be prohibited from running for any position in the apartment building's administration in the future." The proposal was approved unanimously, with Mrs. Margaret being the only one not to raise her hand, not out of disagreement, but because she was paralyzed by shock and shame. When the meeting was adjourned, she remained seated in her chair, staring into space while the other residents left, some casting looks of contempt, others simply ignoring her presence. I approached her when the hall was almost empty. "Why?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Why didn't you report me right away? Why wait, stage this dual spectacle?" "Because some lessons need to be public to be truly learned," I replied, repeating what I had told John weeks earlier. "And because I wanted you to feel, even just for a moment, what it's like to be publicly humiliated, just as I felt when I discovered my cables had been deliberately cut simply because I voted against your excessive apartment building fee increase." She looked up, surprised. "That's why? Because you voted against the increase?" "Initially, yes. Then you discovered you could profit from it, turning a petty act of revenge into a profitable business. What started as personal retaliation turned into business sabotage." We were silent for a moment. Finally, she got up, gathering the remains of her dignity. "What happens now? Will you sue me? Report me to the police?" "No," I replied simply. "I think you've received enough punishment. Your reputation is destroyed. You lost the manager position you so valued, and I imagine your contract with Fiberlink won't last long after they hear what happened here today. Why are you being no merciful? Don't confuse mercy with strategy, Mrs. Margaret. A lawsuit would be time-consuming, expensive, and attract negative attention to ConnectNet. I prefer this incident to stay confined to our apartment building. Good for me, good for you." She nodded slowly, understanding. "What should I do now?" "I suggest you start by apologizing to the residents you harmed. Then perhaps it's time to consider moving. Fresh starts can be refreshing." I left her there, alone with her thoughts. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a strange lightness. It wasn't exactly joy at Mrs. Margaret's downfall, but a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. 2 weeks later, a moving truck parked in front of the apartment building. Mrs. Margaret left without saying goodbye to anyone, leaving behind only an envelope for each resident. Inside, a simple card with 2 words written in her impeccable handwriting: "I'm sorry." The apartment building elected a new manager, Antonia, the 80-year-old woman who rarely spoke up, but who, when she did, showed impressive wisdom and common sense. Under her leadership, the apartment building prospered, with decisions made democratically and for the common good. As for me, I remained the same discreet retired professor. No one mentioned the ConnectNet matter again, although everyone now knew I was the owner. It was as if there was a tacit agreement to respect my privacy just as I had always respected theirs. Sometimes when I'm on my balcony, taking care of my perfectly healthy begonias, I think about Mrs. Margaret and wonder where she is now. If she learned anything from this whole situation. If she found peace. Maybe yes, maybe no. What I know for sure is that I learned something valuable. Even the most discreet people, who spend their lives avoiding conflicts, need to occasionally stand up and defend not only themselves, but an entire community, even if it means revealing secrets kept under lock and key. And if there's one thing 6 decades of life have taught me, it's that patience, when combined with intelligence and a keen sense of justice, is the most powerful weapon there is. Because true revenge is not a dish best served cold. It's the one that comes at the exact moment, not before, not after, when all the pieces are perfectly positioned for checkmate. As my late wife used to say, "Robert, you may be the most patient man in the world, but when you decide to act, it's like a silent tsunami. Nobody sees it coming, but everyone feels the impact." And so, in a quiet apartment building in the suburbs, a valuable lesson was learned by everyone. Never underestimate the retired professor in 302, especially if he takes such good care of his begonias.